All right. Well, hello, everybody. It is awesome to be here today. So for the next, 30, 35 minutes, I'm going to take you through a bit of the state when it comes to mobility and electrification and how we're seeing it currently. I'm going to start by sort of painting a picture of the future, get into the vision, mission of our new office on future mobility, and then hopefully at the end, be able to answer some of your questions and as raw and as interactive of a way as I can. It's an honor to be here. I know that I'm standing in the way of the Little Brown Jug game on Saturday, so I will try to move as quick as I can, but let's get into it. So I'd like to begin by looking into the future, to the year 2030. And that's because the next 10 years will be a landmark decade for mobility. Electric vehicles are expected to pass internal combustion engine vehicle sales by 2030. Software will represent more than 50% of the value of a vehicle by 2030. Level 2 autonomous vehicles are expected to make up almost 50% of new vehicle production by 2030. So you'll likely still be able to drive your car, but there's a good chance it's going to park itself or it's going to drive on the highway by itself. Also by 2030, Tesla is expecting to produce 20 million vehicles a year, and Uber is committed to 100% EV ride sharing. So it'll be a big decade. And that said, our governor and this administration fundamentally believe that the year 2030 and the future of mobility, frankly, will belong to the state that prepares for best. And the year 2030 is not something future state officials just enter. In fact, it's something that today's officials will create. And that was the idea behind this new Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, to be a dedicated resource there through the decade to coordinate public-private sector collaboration. Oops. So today, during this presentation, I really want to accomplish two things. I want to describe our case for change, so why the state invested in a new state office, and frankly, why it matters. And then I want to get into our strategy and our objectives. But before we do that, before we go anywhere, I want to start with the definitions. And I know that everyone has their own definitions of mobility and electrification, but as context, I'd like to share ours. So to us, mobility refers to technologies and services that enable goods, people and goods to move around more freely. So the key point here is that it's simple, it's to the point, leaves a little bit of room for ambiguity or the future. There's no mention of automotive. Automotive is just one industry, in fact, it's converging on the space. And then electrification to us refers to the range of technologies that use electricity to propel a vehicle. The key point here is that it's not just charging stations, not just the grid, not just vehicles. It's the harmonization of all of those things. So let's start with the case for change. And so the creation of our office was really informed by 5 market trends that I want to spend a little bit of time on: industry disruption, workforce evolution, more competitive R&D and startup environments, increasing importance of smart infrastructure, and then regional asset growth. So the first market trend is industry disruption. The last 10 years have shown a strong domestic auto industry, but Michigan's per capita income remains below the national average. What this means is that a strong domestic auto industry no longer guarantees widely shared prosperity in Michigan. The last decade has seen 4 foundational technologies: electric, autonomous, shared, and connected, disrupt the mobility and electrification supply chain. And this disruption is creating and shifting profit pools and creating new winners and losers. And if you look at the bar chart, you'll notice how the relationship between emerging and classic profit pools are expected to play out over the next 15 years, with emerging pools being profits from vehicles and components with new electrified, autonomous, connected, and shared tech. And then for the classic profit pool, profits from vehicles with components from gas-powered or internal combustion engines. Now, when it comes to Michigan, electric vehicle technology, we have about an 11% share of the North American EV production market. And that's expected to fall to 8%. So we really have to be laser focused over the next couple of years to retain that production. With autonomous vehicle technology, more than 50% of Michigan's auto industry works on projects related to autonomous vehicles in state. To us, that's just not enough. So we're going to be targeting increased investment within our mobility ecosystem. And then when it comes to connected and shared technologies, Michigan suppliers have contributed the most to the state's auto employment since 2013. But the car is changing, and so is the content that these suppliers need to provide. And the supply chain impact has been really noticeable with traditional automakers. They're producing parts in-house again, like e-axles, to claim a greater share of value. New OEMs are challenging traditional OEMs. Tier ones are moving backwards in the supply chain to sell things like batteries. Tier twos are skipping over the tier ones to sell directly to automakers. And then you have companies that used to specialize in graphics for video games are now major automotive suppliers. And these non-auto suppliers are becoming a bigger factor due to the heavy reliance on the same foundational autonomous, connected, shared, and electric technologies. Many modes of transportation are converging. What does this mean? The future of mobility will impact more than auto. The future of mobility is multimodal. A lot of times around here, we refer to those four technologies, autonomous, connected, shared, and electric, as vehicles. But the world doesn't look at it that way. They look at those technologies as the through lines between the mobility that takes place across air, land, space, and sea of people and goods. So in the chart on the left, you see that autonomous tech will grow. It's about 3.3 trillion by 2030. There's that year again, 2030. But self-driving cars are only a portion of the market. For instance, shipping innovations are changing how smart infrastructure impacts state economies, from smart customs ports to autonomous freight solutions and last mile delivery. And autonomous technology should reduce logistics costs by 47% by 2030. Commercial ground and aerial drones could represent up to 80% of consumer goods deliveries by even 2026, so before 2030. And a single global shipment currently can involve 30 organizations and over 200 interactions across various infrastructure assets. And so our strategy with this office is really to capture as many of those interactions as we can. And other states, other countries should be thinking about that the same way. And further on, when you think about fleets, and fleets are such a big conversation right now, and especially with EVs, using an electric bus instead of a diesel bus could save a district $6,000 per seat, or around $230,000 per bus over a 14-year lifespan. And these buses are actually a better source of distributed power because of their usage patterns. They're predictable, and they're leveraged during off hours. They're idle at precisely the times when energy demand is at its peak, midday and during the hot summer months. So by storing and drawing power from a fleet of parked school buses, for example, utilities can avoid wasting surplus energy from renewables or cranking up natural gas power. For example, let's say we have another polar vortex and the grid goes down and a nursing home needs power. You can just roll a school bus over there to help solve the problem in the interim. I mean, those are the types of examples where it's not just tech for tech's sake. It's not just improving the infrastructure, actually tying infrastructure improvement to helping someone in a crisis. And that's what this stuff should all be about. And so Michigan, we believe, can leverage its automotive advantage to drive other transportation modes forward, like shipping and last mile delivery. Two areas I think of growth that we really need to look at over the next 2 years are at our border crossings, for example. I mean, our border crossings are globally significant, but admittedly underutilized. Michigan is home to 2 of the top 3 busiest rail ports in the US. However, Michigan is not a top 5 rail state due to perceived rail congestion in Detroit and a lack of infrastructure on Port Huron. Smart infrastructure that enables new mobility can alleviate this. And then when it comes to drones, Michigan ranks in the bottom half of being a commercial drone-friendly state. Yet, Michigan has multiple ground and aerial drone test sites and training programs. Look no further than Ann Arbor with MER and the work of the aerospace school. Michigan State University, Kettering University, Michigan Tech, Michigan Unmanned Aerial Systems Consortium Testing Center, which is 11,000 square miles of airspace in Alpena, Northeast Michigan, as a mobility player in drones. I mean, that's an important point too, that, the state is the mobility state. It's not just Southeast Michigan that's driving some of these technologies forwards. And when you think about some of the industry players, like Michigan drone startups have actually raised almost $40 million in venture capital in the last 5 years. But these stories go untold because we haven't traditionally stitched them together in a way that is a narrative that the rest of the country and the rest of the world can hear about. And so hopefully with this office, we'll be able to, tell the drone story as well as we're telling the auto story going forward. The second market trend is workforce evolution. So the jobs impact of mobility and electrification will be significant. Nationally, mobility industry will need 45,000 new people with computer-related engineering skills by 2030. Michigan's going to need about 12,000 of those to retain its pole position. Yet only Illinois is losing more tech grads when compared to peer states. I mean, homegrown talent must be retained. Michigan continues to graduate more tech professionals than it adds new tech jobs. This means we got to all come together. This isn't just a university thing. Michigan's government, university, business leaders, we got to work together to upgrade university curriculums, tying them more to on-demand employer needs, and working on corporate credentialing programs. We can't have a situation where a really good student graduates from University of Michigan, gets a great job at Ford or FCA or Toyota, and then has to be retrained day one. What a waste. We can solve that before the kid even graduates if we work together a bit more. I mean, it's all going to come down to upskilling and reskilling. And right now, I can't share more, but we are working on thinking about really targeted initiatives to address both of those things. Next market trend, more competitive R&D and startup environments. Startups have enriched Michigan's business R&D environment. Michigan's the second highest receiver of VC funds to mobility and electrification startups, but that's still just a tenth of California. And if you look at the graph, unlike some of the other regions, 94% of our VC funds for mobility startups go towards hardware startups. Software startup founders often get educated here and then take their ideas elsewhere. This matters. Mobility-related startups matter. In fact, last year, the US gained about 325,000 jobs from startups. 4.6% of those were mobility startup jobs. Michigan gained about 11,000 jobs from startups in 2019. 7.2% of those were mobility startup jobs. So Michigan and mobility startups, and these startups have a larger job creation impact in Michigan than they do nationally. Moving on. Fourth market trend, the increasing importance of smart infrastructure. And I think John Paracchio is on the line and he can attest. I mean, this is a fascinating space for a couple of reasons. So smart infrastructure, we believe, is a new and cutting edge economic development tool. The states, sure, the Department of Transportation owns infrastructure, but it's also this like critical new currency for other state departments, whether it's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. I mean, infrastructure can be a powerful economic development tool that can drive business attraction, create jobs, new business models. And frankly, that's what these larger companies are looking for when they want to open a manufacturing assembly line or anything like that. Michigan's well positioned, and especially Ann Arbor is the home of the largest vehicle to infrastructure technology deployment. However, to continue competing globally, we need to keep creating global firsts. And why this is important, it's really twofold, and we can really do two very important things here. One probably is more important than the other. So our smart infrastructure can create economic opportunity as it's saving lives. So almost 10,000 fatal car crashes in Michigan over the last decade, 94% due to human error. So the sooner this stuff can be deployed, the more lives can be saved. And as we're doing that, you know, MDOT has activated nearly 500, I think it's 600 now, miles of technology-enabled corridors. In turn, General Motors, Toyota, 3M, Bosch, Ford, Magna, Waymo, Continental, just to name a few, are testing on it. Key takeaway there is where companies test, they invest. We're seeing that right now in Texas, Arizona. You know, these companies aren't just down there, they're testing autonomous trucking or autonomous ride sharing services. They're creating jobs down there. And that's why this stuff is important. So over the last decade, because of the industry disruption that I've described, it's actually accelerated the future of mobility in Michigan and also the future of electrification in Michigan. We've seen an actually consistent drumbeat of new investment from companies in this disruption that just need to be closer to the end customer and need reliable manufacturing expertise more than ever. There's been over $41 billion in new OEM and supplier investment over this last decade and 90,000 new jobs. And it's not just the automakers. You can see 21 automakers, 1,800 suppliers, and new mobility companies across the board have chosen Michigan. So this new investment is more than any other region in the United States and also North America. And you can see how we stack up. I mean, it's a clear, decisive win. And here are just some examples of just like last year, which is crazy, right? So Waymo made a $13.6 million investment in Detroit to build the world's first factory, 100% dedicated to autonomous vehicles. This partnership with Magna is to equip all electric Jaguar I-Paces and Chrysler minivans, and that's 400 new jobs. GM made a big announcement yesterday. Michigan's going to see about 150 million of that, but they also made a $3 billion investment at the Hamtramck location to retool production for electric pickups, and that's 2,200 jobs. FCA, $2.1 billion investment at its Detroit location to aid in the production of the electric Durango and the next generation Grand Cherokee. That's 1,100 jobs. And then Ford, the $700 million investment at the Dearborn headquarters to produce the all-new F-150 and the new production of the Raptor. That's 1,500 jobs. So in turn, what you're seeing is our local companies are investing, and that's enticing some of these other companies who, I don't know, could go anywhere in North America, and they're looking for a landing zone in North America, you know, but they choose Michigan. You look at Akasol, a German battery technology company. They could have won anywhere, but they chose Michigan, and they'll focus on the second generation OEM battery system that they're creating right here. So Michigan, and this is sort of just plays into the narrative. I'm almost summarizing in a way that I could keep going, but I will be quick here. But Michigan's unique mix of regional assets give tech clusters like Silicon Valley, Israel, and other high growth markets many opportunities for deep partnership. And we can spend an hour on each of these. But you look at some of these high growth tech markets that have a high concentration of software companies needing like rapid prototyping, low volume manufacturing. We have that in spades. Factories operating with excess capacity, especially during off cycles. Risky supply chains in international markets, cost prohibitive, IP theft risk. We have deep, reliable manufacturing expertise and infrastructure. You look at end customer base. You know, you could start in Silicon Valley, or you can start in the Southeast or Japan, but in a lot of cases, if you really want to end up on a vehicle, you probably need to talk to someone in Dearborn, Saline, Auburn Hills, or Detroit. Same with testing. Other places, high growth markets, Austin, Texas, Boston, Silicon Valley, limited access to diverse testing environments and connected infrastructure. We have Four Seasons testing environments, and the list goes on and on and on. But we have strong competitors, so it's critical that the state's mobility and electrification programs be resourced to keep up. And that's what we're working on now. I've been in this job since July, and a lot of the majority of it, sure, we've scored some early wins, and I'll talk about that in a second, but a lot of it has been making sure that this industry gets resources and that it gets the type of exposure in state government that it needs. And you look at all of these different regions here, I mean, with San Francisco and Silicon Valley, it's access to venture capital and talent. Shanghai, it's about EVs and EV subsidies. Israel, it's about startups. It's the best startup ecosystem in the world. Munich, it's about corporate R&D. The thing about that is they're not one-trick ponies, but those stories are incomplete. I don't think they compare to Michigan because I think we have all four of those in a very major global way. And so now I want to get into the strategy. So based on everything that I just explained to you, to address those challenges and those opportunities, our governor signed an executive order creating this new office back in February. And then because of the pandemic and other things, we were launched in July, but we're ready to go. And we've already done some really interesting things. So the vision for this office is pretty simple: a stronger state economy through safer, more equitable, and environmentally conscious transportation for all Michigan residents. And there are a couple of guiding principles here that I think are between the lines of that vision. The first is that a systems level approach is what's going to create economic development advantages. So how people and goods move around is not just isolated to one mode. So simply being the best at autonomous cars is too narrow of a win to claim global leadership. It all comes back to those core elements we talked about, those four foundational technologies. They're systematically linked. And a state that can intentionally and consistently integrate all these elements into its systems for movement, that's a state that's going to win. it shouldn't just be tech for tech's sake. The second guiding principle, collaboration between the public and private sector is more critical than ever. So a state that can leverage public investment to spark private investment will move faster and build deeper partnerships. And then finally, responsive policy is a core asset. A state that focuses on new policy frameworks that account for future mobility scenarios, it's going to have the agility to hold leadership positions longer. Because the way that the future is going to speed up, I don't think there's going to be one leader over decades. I mean, I think different regions are really going to compete for the future of transportation over the next couple of years. So our policy frameworks need to be ready for that. And so I've given you the vision, I've given you the sort of the between the lines guiding principles of that vision. And that almost leads, well, that does lead into our 6 core objectives. Increasing mobility investment in Michigan. So generating new investment, job creation, that's the basics. But then engaging more mobility startups like we talked about. Expanding Michigan's smart infrastructure. Accelerating EV adoption. So supporting the transition from internal combustion engine vehicle sales or vehicles to electric vehicles. And then expanding the state's charging infrastructure. So that's really twofold, right? It's building out the industry as you're reducing range anxiety for fleets and for passengers. 5th, further enabling Michigan's mobility workforce. And then 6th, bolstering Michigan's mobility manufacturing core, protecting the state's competitiveness in electric and autonomous vehicle manufacturing, while also marking a path towards its evolution. And so our approach really has 2 interlocking components. And we believe by interlocking them, that's what's going to create this integrated approach that extends across economic development, workforce, infrastructure, and the grid. Because traditionally those in state government have been pretty separate from each other. They work together, but they've been pretty separate. We think it all works together. For instance, strong talent pools attract growing companies. These growing companies, these emerging companies are going to fill innovation pipelines in a region. And they're also going to fill the innovation pipelines of the larger companies in the region, like automakers and suppliers. So you got these startups, these automakers, suppliers, all pumping out new technology. They're going to need infrastructure to test that new technology on. And so we're going to have to develop our infrastructure, which is what we've done. In turn, smarter infrastructure reinforces Michigan's advantage. And as these new technologies become successful, more jobs are created. That means there's going to need to be more training. So targeted training bolsters this new talent pool, and then the circle repeats itself. We want this circle to move faster and be more future-proof. And the levers that we want to pull for that are dynamic programming and responsive policy. And so we've been around since July, but here's some of our early wins. The self-driving vehicle corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that. So the team that is now the office started working on that and conceptualizing it and essentially bringing it in back in the fall. And now it's going, we're in phase 1. We've also launched an autonomous shuttle service for Detroit Hospital, Detroit Medical Center, to help senior citizens get to and from their appointments. And that's in partnership, and these are all P3s. That's in partnership with Wayne State, DTE Energy, City of Detroit, and others, MDOT. The big news from Eagle, our partner agency, 30 new DCFC fast chargers statewide, 1.7 million in grants. And that's just the first round. There will be more opportunities here. And what I love about this is it was focused on rural areas, very strategically placed along these well-traveled routes, mostly outside of Southeast Michigan. And then a couple of weeks ago, we were a partner with Ford, Bosch, and Bedrock to announce an automated valet parking demo in downtown Detroit. First of its kind in North America, where you can literally get out of your car and it'll park itself. And we continue to talk about how to make that more permanent. Again, it's not just about auto. So we're focused on building digital infrastructure in the sky. So we invested along with Wayne County in a project with Airspace Link, which is a great Michigan company, at looking at traffic laws in the sky. Oftentimes, when you have to deliver medical supplies or maybe a critical part via drone the size of a quarter, but if it breaks, it could cost millions of dollars. That drone needs to fly across multiple communities, but each community has its own drone laws. So a software platform is needed to interpret that in real time to make sure the drone is obeying the law. And that's what we're testing in Wayne County. We announced, I think 2 weeks ago now, maritime mobility grants in the UP. So testing new autonomous maritime technologies with the Great Lakes Research Center. COVID-19 mobility solutions. We did a round to award virus mitigation technologies. So we invested in ultraviolet light technology and May mobility shuttles in Grand Rapids that disinfects the air and the surfaces and allows that shuttle to continue to operate with more safety. You can see in the picture autonomous cleaning robots at airports during off hours. And that Grand Rapids Airport, who was the partner, that project was then parlayed to more airports, DTW, and even some other uses outside of airports. And that's from a great Michigan company, Pratt & Miller. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be high tech. We worked with Penske in the city of Detroit to install bus dividers to make people feel a bit safer about public transit. That's solving a mobility problem, and that's what this office and this state should be doing. And then finally, we're a partner in a new accelerator in Detroit, focused on mobility, but also focused on diverse founders and providing equity and services to help these founders grow. And so I think the takeaways from these early wins to us, again, mobility is very multimodal, and also mobility is for everybody. This office and this industry, I mean, can play a huge role in equity, and we're going to look at every opportunity to do that. So I want to go back to the self-driving vehicle corridor. So it's the road of the future. It's never been done globally this way for this long. Self-driving vehicle corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor, about 40 miles, one of the state's busiest and most important routes. Will be a public laneway dedicated to self-driving. And the idea here was to create and improve access to safe and equitable transportation while also driving economic impact. This doesn't work if it hurts someone's ability to get to work on time or hurts some small business along the way. I mean, the idea for this was to be an economic driver, a safety driver, and get some of this technology on the road quicker. So really, the anatomy of a CAV laneway, it really breaks down into really four components. You have the physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, coordination infrastructure, and the operational infrastructure. And so that's how the cabinet team is looking at it. And I should back up and explain the partnership. So beginning of this administration, this corridor was a priority, and they were looking for new and inventive ways to move the needle on it. And so MDOT, along with our office, or the team that is our office now, worked on an RFP for a co-developer. And one of the bids came from Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, which is an Alphabet, Google's parent company, backed company. And then they're also backed by the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, which is one of the most prolific infrastructure investors in the world. So Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners came to the table with Ford Motor Company. U of M was a part of it. And American Center for Mobility was a part of it too, put forth a bid and won that bid. Now, with that bid, they created a new company or a new entity called Cavenu. And that's probably the name that you've seen if you've been following this project. The idea here is Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners wants to build a series of Cavenus all around the world. And they chose Michigan, frankly, because of the public-private partnerships that have been proven out in the past, favorable AV policy through the years, a city and state that get along, great assets along a great corridor. If they wanted density, if they really just wanted to make money, they could have probably gone to the Port of Long Beach and picked a corridor leading out of the port. They chose Michigan, in their words, there's no better place to build a playbook for this sort of thing. So back to the four types of infrastructure that I mentioned: physical, digital, coordination, and operational. So obviously, we're gonna need to look at, like, okay, where's the route? What's the roadway design? Where does it need to be barriered? And if it's barriered, what are the edge cases? Meaning, if an ambulance needs to pull off to the side, how do you do that? If a delivery van needs to pull off for a small business, how do you do that? Is it just straight Michigan Avenue? How do you get to DTW? And if it's straight Michigan Avenue to Ann Arbor, that's just not going to work. You need to turn at Ypsilanti up to Washington. Do you leverage I-94? All of these different questions are going to be answered in phase one of the project, which started back in August. Cavenu's hired their team. They're now working on with MDOT, and they've established different work groups. The work groups are technology and infrastructure. That's one. Policy and regulation. That's two. Community engagement and economic development. That's three. Four is financing and operations. Five is planning and design. And the idea with these work groups is to create a series of 6-month deliverables, and then at the end of the 24-month phase one, ultimately have the feasibility analysis needed to proceed. And frankly, we wouldn't have announced this project the way that we did if we didn't feel confident that this could succeed. And so this is a project that you guys are going to play a huge role in. And frankly, I mean, from Ann Arbor transportation officials to Washtenaw County officials, the western end of the corridor is key. And so I'm excited to get to work with you guys on this. Admittedly, I haven't had as much of a chance to work with the U of M community on this sort of thing, but I've just been really impressed with some of the questions that have been raised early on, even just around downtown Ann Arbor. Where does, even from digging up fiber to some of the work that's already been done through UMTRI and the CCAT, like making sure that that stuff is sort of the ground, the bedrock that this project can sit on to be a success. So in my last couple of minutes, I wanted to get into some of the initiatives that we're chasing this year. So I'm going to do it by objective, if you remember those objectives from earlier. And I'm breaking it down by the two levers that we discussed, dynamic programming and responsive policy. And everything that we do needs to have some sort of targeted economic outcome and be tracked to be successful. It's not just about having meetings. And so for objective number one, objective number two, one being investment in Michigan, mobility investment in Michigan, and number two, engaging more mobility startups, we're going to be rolling out a new mobility challenge grant program. It's going to look to target some of the major mobility challenges that our cities have, and then bring in solution providers and help fund the operations of those. That's on its way. Michigan testing passports. So how can we work with other peer states to develop partnerships around custom data packages? And how can we get some of these, again, where you test, you invest, how do we get some of these other companies that are considering other places to locate in Michigan, locate at ACM or M-City, or even in the UP, and startup assembly lines. So making sure that it's very, very clear to any startup how to leverage government resources. Often a lot of the work that our team does is just demystify government resources, because sometimes it can be really complicated. But similar to how like Berry Gordy and Motown had it back in the day, where they had the process sort of was laid out, and then they found the right voice, and the voice went down the assembly line from dancing to songwriting to all those things, and it produced an artist. That's kind of how we want to look at startups, where they can get on this line and always know what the next step is to grow in Michigan. Policy-wise, relooking at R&D and EV tax credits, establishing state-to-state innovation-based MOUs. Yeah, we compete with other states, but this office is going to be about partnering, because this is a bigger than a state-to-state conversation. It's a global conversation. For Michigan Smart Infrastructure, continue to look at our corridor between Detroit and Ann Arbor and try to activate new technologies. Looking at goods futures, so prove out larger in-state investment in goods delivery through grants that help leading mobility companies develop use cases for bigger investments in the future. Linking industry to urban mobility opportunities. So beyond 40-mile corridors, what can we do for curbside monetization or parking? And then in turn, on the policy side, support MDOT in its tolling study, and the Council on Future Mobility, which is about to be relaunched again. There's great work done during the Snyder administration that our governor now is parlayed into a new council on Future Mobility and Electrification, with industry experts, state legislators, state department heads, to advise legislature and the governor on AV and EV policy trends. So more to come on that. And then with our EV future, accelerating EV adoption, programming wise, vehicle to grid pilots. Again, we want to keep up with the Joneses. We want to keep growing our charging infrastructure, but what can we do to really stand out? How can we pilot things like inductive charging, wireless charging in motion, adding locally produced electricity to the grid, like the example I gave you before? And then policy wise, interstate partnerships. It's very, if you have an electric vehicle, it's very easy to drive from Boise to Albuquerque. There's consistent charging locations, consistent charging experiences. That's because there was a compact created called Rev West with the Mountain West states. And they committed to strong policies around EVs. You're seeing it on the East Coast, and we'd like to see it in the Midwest. There's also some low-hanging fruits, like streamlining EV installation permitting, registration. If you have an EV, you have to pay like $250 extra. That's not a good incentive. So what can we do about that? Allow for charger placement on state properties, things like that, that we can change, I think, in a short period of time. And then finally, the last two, enable Michigan's mobility workforce, and then bolster Michigan's mobility manufacturing core. Looking at signature initiatives that allow for, retraining existing factory talent to build and assemble things like batteries, to build up that supply chain, that EV supply chain. If you remember, 11% of the North American market is what Michigan has for electric vehicle production. We need to grow it, and it starts with our workforce. And also, when it comes to manufacturing, more hardware to software matchmaking, allowing some of these same manufacturers that helped us win in World War II, help the 20th century be the American century, making sure that they're connected to these emerging tech opportunities. And then policy-wise, just making sure that we achieve strong labor standards, worker protections, to ensure that the high quality jobs in mobility are here now and in the future. And that's it, guys. That's your ball game. I know I threw a lot at you. I hope it made sense. I hope it maybe stimulated some new ideas, but I guess I'll turn it back to Dr. Liu.
Hi, Trevor. I see there are a couple of these questions, and then I will ask the questions, and I will give time to the audience to ask questions too. So there's a question on the chat box, say, why is the share of North America electrical vehicle production expected to fall by 2025? I believe one of your slides shows the current EV production is 11%, and then in 5 years going to fall to 8% also. I guess that's the question related to that.
It's not like the industry is growing. It's just we're not getting the wins. Wins are going to Texas. Wins are going to Tennessee. And so I think it's about positioning our incentives in some cases and our workforce to just be more competitive. We still have a lot of the supply base, and that's why companies like Rivian want to locate here. But Rivian is also moving some of their operation to California because maybe we weren't the best place to grow once you gain that supply chain. We need to take that feedback seriously and continue to look at companies like Lordstown and others that are changing the game. Bollinger is a local company we need to keep here. Industry's growing, our EV supply chain's growing. It's just that production number is a little bit scary.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question related to the new proposed grant program. Is this new money? Is this a new money, or these are funds from the PlanetM?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the continuation of the PlanetM program in more of a scaled way. The beauty of this office, it's combining the Council on Future Mobility and PlanetM under one roof, essentially. So all your PlanetM services that you know and love are now going to be offered through the office.
Okay. There's another question on what infrastructure technology is needed for automated vehicles.
You broke up a little bit there. If you could...
I'm sorry. Yeah. So there's a question coming from the audience that what infrastructure technology is needed for automated vehicles?
I think you can, at least with this corridor, some of the things that we're looking at are like, there's the standard stuff that University of Michigan is very, very familiar with, but then you look at like machine readable lane markings, digital signage and signaling, appropriate sensors in places sensors haven't been before, highly reliable connectivity across communities, high definition maps, high accuracy ground-based GPS, roads, I mentioned road sensors, but also for weather, not just sort of to allow the vehicle to sense if a light is red or if there's a pedestrian. But then there has to be interoperability across communities, similar to the drone example I gave you. I think with autonomous vehicles, we need to make sure that whether you're in Redford or Warren or Ypsilanti or Ann Arbor, there's consistency at the local level in navigating this future.
That's great, great answer. So the next is actually rather than it's actually a comment. Say, great presentation, Trevor, and the audience say, I especially appreciate your reference to the cross-border mobility,
Yeah.
which I think is a huge on the development opportunity for Michigan. Maybe you can give a little bit more comments on that.
Yeah, well, we can't. It's like we can't stop talking to Ontario. Honestly, there's other regions that we want to focus on, but they're just keep new opportunities to do something with Ontario keep bubbling up across whether it's the mobility of goods or the mobility of people. I think that Detroit and Michigan, we share a border, but we carry the most weight on some of the most weight on the Toronto to Chicago route, which is a major global route. And so I think very much the future of that route depends on what Michigan does. And hopefully the CIV corridor works and it's just the beginning of something much larger. To me, I think there's something that can be done by the air with Ontario. There are things that we can do on the ground with commercial infrastructure, whether it's warehousing or improving congestion at points, not just with cars, but I mentioned with rail. And then continue to do the global first. Like a few years ago, we did the first international crossing of an autonomous vehicle from Detroit to Windsor, around the lake, back up through Port Huron to Traverse City. I mean, those are the types of things we need to keep doing.
Great. There's a number of questions come up. I hope we can answer all of those. There's a question related to education and what are the ways that you would recommend to retain talent in Michigan? From college education standpoint, how can universities prepare future graduates for careers in autonomous vehicle transportation?
Yeah. So I think we need to shift our focus as government officials. It's not just about degree completion. It's about degree completion and then getting a job. That part of it, ... and getting a job part, sometimes not all the resources are put in that direction. And I also don't think it's the silver bullet solution, some massive state program and checkbook. I think it has to be somewhere in the middle between that and the organic efforts that are happening anyway, because maybe the state hasn't stepped up in certain areas. Like you're seeing the Michigan Mobility Institute in Detroit. You're seeing other sort of semi-private, semi-public efforts to create these credentialing programs and then picking a university where it can live. There's probably something in the middle, something where there is a large government resource push in this area that extends across departments and is tracked by the governor's office. But then there's probably a middle ground there that involves making sure that every dollar at the highest level that's given can be tracked back through a program that's either existing and has potential if it receives more resources, or moving in a more agile fashion to create new programs that address the needs of today, like remote working in this environment. And that's not expected to change. I mean, there won't be another Silicon Valley for a while. I mean, if you can introduce remote working into the equation, I mean, I think that talent, it opens the door for states with, competitive quality of life, low cost living, upward mobility. You can compete. You can compete in ways you couldn't. And there's not many silver linings in 2020, but that could be one of them. And we need to be prepared because every other state's thinking that way.
Yeah, there's actually a sort of a related question with education asking, do you think Michigan universities geared to prepare students to meet the market needs?
Of course. We have great universities. This isn't a critique of our universities. Look, like the robotics lab at UM, like that wasn't created overnight. That took decades to get it to where it needed to be. And you need to start planting these seeds for other universities to experience what UM has experienced with those sorts of programs. Eastern Michigan, Grand Valley State, where I went, Wayne State. And if you can bring along those universities with what U of M is doing, that's a juggernaut. We already have the largest R&D hub in the Midwest by investment. And within a 5-hour drive of Detroit, you have 1.3 million students, 13 of the top 100 institutions from the Big Ten schools to even Ontario universities. So I think the talent issue doesn't have to just stay within state lines. I think it's something where the universities can get together and frankly collaborate more with the private sector and have that be more of a Midwest solution than just a Michigan solution.
It's a great point. There's a question related with business model, and the question is, what is the business model proposed by states to mobility startups?
Can you say the last part of that question again?
So the question related to what are the business model proposed by the state with the Michigan startups?
Oh, with startups.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's twofold. We need to empower what we have. We have some great local programs, from Lean Rocket in Jackson to what TechTown has done in Detroit, Start Garden in Grand Rapids. I mean, these aren't exclusive like mobility plays, but they touch mobility. And make sure that they are interconnected, understand the importance of helping mobility startups versus other startups. I can only speak for my industry. But then also introduce some out-of-state players, grow the pie, if you will. You know, accelerators that have a track record and a global network for growing startups, and a global network of corporate members that can be introduced to Michigan. This can be the entree for them to get introduced to our ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And if you can, I think, and then frankly, tie those national or global accelerators that we can bring in here, or tie them to what's happening locally. And then you begin to develop this chain, this value chain, where it's like, okay, if a regional accelerator has helped a startup as much as it can, and there's diminishing returns, and they need to help the next startup, how can we create a graduating point for that company not to leave Michigan, but then to move on to sort of the next thing, the next resource, the next global accelerator. I keep saying accelerator, but it's more than that. It's more of a studio model, like a startup studio, where it's like you start an accelerator, then you go to the studio and you grow in the studio. It goes back to my assembly line model I explained earlier. And all along the way, we need to plug in the right venture capital, meaning early stage funding, but then don't get to a point where, you know, the company's growing so fast and they're about to get well funded by somebody, probably someone out of state, that they're not faced with this weird question of, I love my state, I want to stay here, my family's here, but all the opportunity is somewhere else because of where my money's coming from. And those are the types of questions that we need to have happen less.
There's a question related with NAFTA. Will NAFTA apply differently to EVs?
I don't know, honestly. Let's crowdsource that answer.
Yeah, I don't know that either. I don't know whether NAFTA apply differently.
I apologize. I can't. My computer's frozen, so I can't really see the questions. Otherwise, I'd read them myself. So thank you for walking.
Yeah, I can read those to you. So there's a question. This is an interesting question. If you have to pick one technology that you would bet will be the key technology for the next decade, what would that be?
Oh my gosh. Well, I will say electrification. I mean, if it's a broad answer, and autonomous delivery of goods, autonomous futures around trucking, last mile, middle mile.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this, like the future playing out. I mean, I think probably the next 10 years, and it'll be 10 years at least before we see anything resembling ubiquitous AV. Probably starts with dedicated environments, lanes, parking structures, valet parking on private property. Then it extends out to more predictable environments like highway driving, subdivisions, college campuses, hospital campuses. And then I think it takes off in the 40s and the 50s with some of the world's most progressive cities literally closing off parts of their cities to drivers. But before all that happens, electrification needs to be prevalent.
Yeah, I agree. The immediate next 10 years, EV will be technology. And I actually myself has a question related to these new program you discussed, the Michigan testing passport. Can you speak a little bit more on that in terms of what that passport means?
Yeah. It's conceptual still. The idea would be to, like up to this point, I can give you a little bit of a history. So what PlanetM has tried to do is provide discounts or gap funding to companies that probably wouldn't test at ACM or MCity or another test, Kettering, another testing site otherwise. What we found is that didn't really work. There wasn't enough of a carrot or an incentive. So the concept of a testing passport is to say, all right, where do we fall short? And is it a data question or is it a data thing where we fall short? Was there some level of customer service that we missed, some offering? Or are companies looking for something more dynamic? Meaning like, could Michigan partner with a Southwest state to offer some sort of service or passport, or I don't know. I'm sort of talking in general concept. Could allow for testing in the winter and desert testing and whatever, whenever they need to do desert testing, but have it all kind of be under one consistent experience and service model where both states can benefit. And what within that service model could we do to then deepen the relationship with the company over time?
Okay. I don't see we have further questions. Let me see, there's one more. Okay, one more question coming. Oh, two more. We have 1 minute. Looks like there's a lot of good things happening and opportunities for everyone that want to be part of this industry, including education. But it appears all of this information is not available in one place. Is there a plan to develop a website that will be the gateway for all this information?
Yeah, we're working on that. It'll probably live on the Michigan Economic Development Corporation site, michiganbusiness.org, but we're working on
it. There's another question on could existing roadways be used for AV-TAC, or would the current infrastructure need to be upgraded?
Yeah, no, that's part of the phase one of our corridor, is determining where new lanes need to be created, where we can use existing lanes, where it wouldn't interrupt traffic. It's a mixture of both.
Okay. And there's a question related to someone wants you to have your slides. Is there a way you can get the slides?
Oh, you're using me for my slides. I see how it is. Yeah, I can send them over.
Okay. All right.
I'll send them to you.
Yeah. Sure. We'll do that. I think we are out of time now. I want to thank Trevor for taking time out of his busy schedule to discuss the future mobility and electrification today with us. And want to thank you for the audience to join us for this presentation.